Recently, we had Groundhog Day. Does anyone pay attention to Groundhog Day? It's February 2nd. And every year since 1887 in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, the people of Punxsutawney have this huge celebration and wait to see if a groundhog named Punxsutawney Phil sees his shadow. If he comes out of his hole, then it's basically a weather forecast of 6 more weeks of winter-like weather. If he doesn't see his shadow, it's a prediction of an early spring. We all know that story, right? It's American folklore. It's live streamed and it has this huge audience as well. So it's a popular story that was made even more popular by the movie Groundhog Day in the 1990s with Bill Murray. Now, I want to talk about the movie Groundhog Day and using it as a tool to understand past lives. But before I do that, I want to talk a bit more about the background of Groundhog Day. Did you know that each season lasts 13 weeks? And did you know that February 2nd is the middle of winter and that there are always 6 more weeks of winter left? Yeah. It may not always reflect that in the weather, but it's true. And we typically get a warm snap right around February 1st, which is a holy day, observed by many ancient traditions long before there was ever a Punxsutawney Phil. In fact, all the midway points of the seasons are observed as holy days among some cultures, and the Christian church adopted and rebranded them as Christian holy days too. For Catholics, Groundhog Day is Candlemas. People lived and died on agriculture, so the agricultural calendar and the weather were really important to survival. They needed to know when to plant so they could prepare for the weeks, months, and year ahead. In the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray plays I'm not sure if he's a newscaster or a meteorologist, but he gets an assignment to go to Punxsutawney to cover Groundhog Day, and he's not happy about it. He's a self-centered, sarcastic, cynical guy who thinks he's too big of a name to go to some small hick town and cover a silly story, and he's irritated. He lets everyone know it, and he's a pain to be around. He does his show, but he can't leave because the town gets snowed in, and it makes the roads impassable. Now, you might imagine for a guy like Phil, this is a nightmare. He's not digging it at all. So he goes to bed that night thinking that tomorrow he'll get out, and he wakes up to Sonny and Cher singing I Got You, Babe at 6 a.m., just like the day before. In fact, it is the day before. He's stuck in a loop of living the same day over and over and doesn't know how to get out. Now, this movie is a cult classic because it resonates with truth for so many people. Whether you're a Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, or pagan, we all know what it's like to feel trapped in a life where nothing changes. We all have wondered if what we do matters in the big scheme of things. We all have felt stuck. So today, I want to talk about past lives and how you can use this movie to understand past lives or parallel lives if you think like I do that all time is now, but I'll call it past lives to make it easier to conceptualize. So I think Groundhog Day is the perfect way to explain what I've seen in my almost 30 years as a past life regression facilitator. And because it's only one day that Phil keeps reliving over and over, it makes it bite-sized and not too complicated. Okay. So lots of people come to me wanting to know about their past lives. In fact, before COVID, more than half my clients were past life regression clients, not trauma or therapy clients. It's that popular. So whether you believe it or not, people are curious. They have a problem and they can't figure it out. If they're stuck and they've tried looking at everything else, well, maybe it's something from their past lives. And quite often, they're right. When there is an issue of a phobia that seems to be with you your entire life, like a horrible fear of falling, snakes, or dark places, and you have no memory for why you react this way, it could be a past life trauma. Or quite often, it has to do with the way that you died. And a lot of people think that when you die, the scorecard is washed clean. Everything's forgotten and you get a clean slate. And that's just not true. Your memory gets wiped of what happens, but your body remembers everything. The energy of the good and bad stays with you. So it's really important to clean up your garbage as it's happening rather than avoiding it or sweeping it under the rug. Out of sight, out of mind doesn't really work in the energy world. If you have resentment, shame, sad, hate, guilt, or any of the undesirable emotions that we push away, it just builds up with interest until that debt is paid. And doing past life regression is a great way to make the root cause visible so that you can do something about it. Now, I became interested in past life regression as a child. I was precocious. I read lots of books on the occult. Anything that was mysterious was interesting to me. So aliens, Bigfoot, past lives, mediumship, I was all about it. And since I heard about past lives from Edgar Cayce, I wanted to experience it. Now, I didn't have any issues. I was pretty young at the time, but I was just fascinated by it. And the first chance that I got to do it, I leapt at it. And that session was hugely impactful in many ways. It was a no turning back moment that set me on the path to learning about life, spirituality, and myself in a way that nothing else ever could have done, really. And this is what happens to Phil in the movie Groundhog Day. Instead of a regression where he's choosing to go back and relive it in the third person, he's experiencing it the same day in first person. So unlike the average Joe who forgets his past lives, Phil remembers everything. But for everyone else, it's like the first time. So Phil clearly has an advantage, right? So what would you do if you had that foresight? Probably the same thing Phil did. He first tries to rationalize things and wonders if he's crazy. And once he accepts that things are as they are, he uses the situation to enrich and please himself. He starts off loving that he can seduce beautiful women, steal money, and be involved in a police chase for drunk driving because he wakes up the next day and realizes there's no consequences. He can do whatever he wants, but nothing lasts. If you live mindfully enough, you probably have experienced this too. People talk about karma coming back to get you, but we all know people who do horrible things who don't ever seem to have to pay the bill. Now, Phil hasn't seen it yet, but his coming back over and over again, that's the bill. He doesn't have a choice about reliving the day. And it's not a punishment, it's just what has to happen. It started because he was a mean, nasty, selfish person, and this was an opportunity for him to learn something different and do something different. And he used that to be even meaner, nastier, and more selfish, so the cycle continued. In a past life regression, it works kind of the same way. A client might be totally self-righteous or stubborn, but they have no idea. They think they're right. I've had this happen many times. The way I do regression, it's like you're both in the scene reliving it and also seeing it from a third person perspective. So you have the closeness to feel the emotions and have empathy with your past self and their feelings and your situations, but you're also enough of a distance away that you have perspective and understanding of how it looks in the big picture. If you do enough regressions, you see yourself doing the same dumb, blind, thoughtless things over and over again. And I don't say this to be critical. I say this because I've done it. And it's hard to see yourself choosing loneliness, poverty, playing small, self-sacrificing for people who don't care, or being victimized. And once you can see how you're playing a part of that in your life and you choose to stand in your own power, the game changes. And a lot of people think that means an eye for an eye, and it doesn't. You created the energy that binds you, and all you have to do is let go. Typically, that happens by forgiving yourself and thinking, feeling, and acting in a different way. That's it. So in Groundhog Day, Phil didn't pay back all the money he stole. He can't unseduce the women or unlie to someone. He paid his debt by releasing his selfishness and being of service to others. It took all that ugliness that he perpetrated for him to realize that service to others is a service to self. Loving others is loving himself. Only when he became someone who could love did Rita offer him the love that he wanted. But it's one thing to intellectually know this and quite another to embody it. I think that every self-help guru and spiritual advisor has the same end game, right? So how did Phil get there, and how do you get there? It happens through mindful living. Phil did a lot of things that people can point fingers at and judge, like taking advantage of people, making fun of people, and looking down on people. He got tired of that eventually, and he rebelled. He engaged in gluttony, then he committed suicide a few times. He was pretty extreme, but the thing that he did that made all the difference that most of us don't do was to do it mindfully. If you notice in the movie, he never makes the same mistake twice. He doesn't jump off a building twice. If he does something that doesn't get the desired results, he does something else. If he does something that he likes, he does it again. And that's how he learns to master the piano. He takes lessons day after day and practices. So the shortcut way of saying that is that he did more of what worked and did less of what didn't. He paid attention and tweaked as he went. He was a pretty slow learner, but he has all the time in the world. It's the same all over and over again, so it doesn't matter. There was one other thing that Phil did that I think makes all the difference. He began to lead from his heart. In the beginning, there was always an agenda, a goal, a what's in it for me type of thing. And what ends up allowing the day to move forward was Phil's letting go of that. By the end of the movie, instead of Phil going through the days with disdain, hopelessness, and pain, he's going through the day saving a boy from falling from a tree, saving a choking man, genuinely connecting with people, and delivering a heartfelt newscast for Groundhog Day. Everything he does comes from his heart, and Phil goes from being someone who really didn't have any connection to anyone to being beloved by everyone. And that's what gets him out of the matrix and allows the day to roll over into the next one. Now, that's a metaphor for a lot of us. We see life as a reincarnation wheel or a matrix where we have to go around and can't get out. I think that's why the movie is so important. There are messages and stories that can help us to get through the tough times. They can help us to find solutions. And if you're like, yeah, I'm following that, I get that, but I still don't know what I don't know, that's how past life regression can help you. It can give you the same perspective that Phil had when you are the one who remembers everything, but everyone else is going through things for the first time. So I'll share a past life experience of mine that is really common. So hopefully it will apply to a lot of people. And when you're doing training, you practice on a lot of people. They practice on you. So your experience on the participant side racks up pretty quickly. And I think the more memories that you have, the easier it is to make generalizations and see the big picture. Well, so I'm doing these regressions, don't have any goal in mind, but I'm seeing a life here where I'm isolated and alone, and a life there where I'm isolated and alone. There are people around, but there's no emotional connection. In some cases, I couldn't even tell you who those people are because there's not even enough of a relationship to give me any clues. They're just like people. They could be my family. They could be anybody. So in one life, I'm a bitter man who falls in love, goes to all this effort to win the girl who is too good for me, and she ends up being critical and unappreciative and makes my life miserable. She dies, and rather than feeling free, I stew in my bitterness for the rest of my life. In another life, I'm a poor woman who works as a servant. It's a hard life. I'm up before the sun doing backbreaking work, and every day is gray. Then a circus comes to town, and I'm drawn to the music, the color, and the laughter. And I take up with a man who's part of the circus. And when the circus leaves, of course, he does too. But unbeknownst to either of us, he leaves me with a baby. And this child is my pride and joy, but she's born into the same gray, hard life that I have. And I want her to have something more. And when she's little, I scrape together enough to buy her a violin. And it ends up being her escape out of that life. And I encourage her to go, but once again, I'm alone. And there's another life where I was a female captive in the Middle East. I was taken to a harem of a local sheikh. Now, people think of a harem as a brothel or a pleasure palace, and it's not. The Arabic word haram means forbidden, and Islamic worlds are segregated, and it's all women and small children because the men and women are forbidden from sharing the same spaces. So the haram, or harem, is the secluded women's section of the house. Anyway, if you had a harem, it meant that you were rich because most women had to work, so they didn't get to be secluded. So those inside the harem were either servants, slaves, or relatives. And like I said, they didn't get to go outside. So I was a slave. But even though I was really young, I was apparently either very pretty or charming. I couldn't see myself. But the powerful women of the household were jealous and they had me removed really quickly. And there are actually two past lives that were very similar to each other. In one, I was killed pretty quickly. And the other, I belonged to the younger brother of the sheikh. So I wasn't in the haram, but they didn't like me there anyway. So they sent him off to the military or a military mission, a battle or something. And I was killed while he was gone. And in both, I felt desperately isolated and alone. So that's a pattern. And that's strange because my life has never been like that this time around. I have a big, close family. And as I was talking, I can see how things could connect. Perhaps because I have a big, close family, I could say that I don't need anyone else and let myself be content with that. And that's not what I've done. Probably because I saw these lives so early in life, I sought out community and made spaces for people to connect and felt seen my whole life, really. And I do this in my sacred travel adventures, in my private group, in my life in general. It's hard to say what my life would have been like had I not seen this, but I did. And what made a bigger impression on me wasn't the specific thing of make an effort to have a connected life, but the general idea of living intentionally and mindfully for the first time. I shared 4 instances of my past life memories, but there are many, many more when I was alone. And this is true for most people. Regardless of what they see, most are alone. Most of us don't live happy, connected, meaningful lives. We get hurt and we turn inward and slowly collapse in on ourselves, making ourselves smaller and smaller to survive. Or we get very big and scary on the outside and hide the small, scary person on the inside.
Love the vibe? Join the tribe. It's free, and the link is in the show notes. See you there.
And if you've seen the movie Groundhog Day, or even if you haven't, I just shared what it was about, you can see that it doesn't matter what you do. You can find the cure for cancer, burn down a school with kids in it, which I hope nobody is even thinking about. But either can be the path that leads you away from your true self and breaking out of the wheel, or it can lead you to it. It's not what you do that matters. For every one positive thing done in the world, there's a negative thing, and that's just the way of duality. What matters is that you're present, intentional, and you're learning as you go and being your true self in the moment. Now, it might sound heretical, so let me break this down. I tell little Jimmy not to lie, and he doesn't because he's scared to death of the consequences, right? And I tell little Billy not to lie, but he does. He feels really bad because he realized that he's let me down, but more than that, he's let himself down because it wasn't in alignment with his integrity. So from that moment on, Billy seeks truth because it's a function of who he is. If I were looking at this from a black and white perspective, we might say that Jimmy is the better boy because he's never broken the rules. But I think both boys are fine. But I trust Billy more because he embodies the values of honesty and chooses it rather than simply engaging in it because he was told to. Following the rules don't make those your values. Billy understands he has agency and he uses it to express his true nature. And that's what Phil did in the movie Groundhog Day too. And I think that's what makes it a really powerful movie. Phil wasn't particularly wise or mindful in the beginning, but he became that way out of a desire to break free. He started out with hedonism and no care for anyone. Then he went to desperation and started trying to destroy himself. Then he became open-minded and thoughtful and started to notice how things felt. He started noticing, if I do this, then that happens, and began adjusting his behavior to feel better and to get more desirable results. The Groundhog Day is such a great teaching tool for how to do life because I think there is a universal drive to get it right and to be good. I don't know if that's innate or if it's taught, but we all want to feel good about ourselves, to belong, and to have others see us as worthy. In the movie, Phil goes from someone who is really far away from all of those things to someone who gets it. And we're all Phil in a way. We're all flawed. So Phil's journey inspires us to believe that we can get there too. We can find the way to be our best selves. And in the end, Phil develops empathy, and that's a huge asset if you want to live authentically, magically, and with meaning because everything is connected. If you notice that whacking the heads off dandelions doesn't feel good, you might start to treat everything with more care. If you notice that petting your dog feels good for you and him, you may grow an incredible bond. If you notice that being the life of the party feels good in the moment but empty afterwards, you may start to seek different company. It's all feedback. The more empathy you have, the more feedback you can receive. I also think that the movie inspires deep spiritual questions like, are we alone? Are we guided by a mysterious force? Do we have a higher self or spirit guides helping us out? Is there a divine force that loves us and is rooting for us? The movie might stir up questions about the nature of time. Does time exist? Is it linear? Does the present moment influence the next moment? Do the things I do matter? Do I matter? We may never have conclusive answers to these types of questions, but I think by pondering them and entertaining an idea, our lives can have more meaning. Probably my favorite takeaway from the film and from past life regression experiences is this idea that we all make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. Even mistakes that we could consider colossal could just be a necessary step in the journey to get to the next place. One of the things I always say is just keep moving. What I mean by that is that as long as you're moving and making choices, and then you reflect on them later, you're making progress. You can always pivot. But the moment you freeze and stop engaging with life, that's when things start to go haywire and bunch up. If you keep moving, of course, you're going to make some mistakes. But if you learn from the experience, is it really a mistake? Maybe it's just an education so that your next attempt is more successful, meaningful, or useful. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and criticize everything that went wrong. It's harder to be in the game, but be in the game. If you do that mindfully, at the end of the day and at the end of your life, you can feel like you have been here and it was a pretty good run, win, lose, or draw. And that's an important part that was made in the movie too. There's a point where Phil sees this old man dying. He saves the boy who fell from the tree. He saves the choking man, but he never saves the dying man. The nurse says something like, sometimes people just die. And I think that's a critical part of Phil's transformation. He learns a lot of things. He makes choices to engage in life in ways that are meaningful to him, but he isn't all powerful. Some things he just has to accept. When he surrenders, is vulnerable, and speaks to Rita honestly, instead of trying to trick her into liking him, everything changes. Surrender is definitely part of it. We all play the game, but we don't control everything and can't control everything. So I gave you a bunch of tips for how you can use past life regression therapy or the movie Groundhog Day to live a meaningful life. And I'm a hands-on person, so I think experience of past life regression is more helpful, but watching the movie can give you an intellectual understanding. So I'm going to recap those tips now so that you can have them all in one place for easy reference. Number 1 is plan a regular check-in with yourself or a life review. That's what Groundhog Day and the cross-quarter holy days are about. It's about saying, I'm here. Where's here? That allows you to have an honest inventory of what's needed, what's good and strong, and what can help you plan your steps ahead. Maybe the days ahead look lean for a while. That's okay. If you at least know you can create a game plan for that. Maybe happy days are ahead. That's cool too. No matter what, it's all good. And your anxiety level will be a lot lower, and you'll have less chance of being taken by surprise if you review your life at set intervals. And this could be at the end of each day, on the new moon, at the holy days, or the new year. It's all up to you. But I would do a personal inventory on a regular basis, whether you think you need it or not. Number 2 is live mindfully. So there's no point in doing a check-in if you're lying to yourself about what you see. It's not time for positive thinking and affirmations. This is about being objectively aware of what's happening. By objectively aware, I mean non-judgmental. I know that some people may hear this and use it as an excuse to beat up on themselves, and that is not what I'm talking about. The review isn't about berating yourself or anyone else. It's about taking a look at what needs to be tweaked and what's working well so you can do more of what works and less of what doesn't. Number 3 is look for patterns. We're all notoriously blind to our own stuff, but seeing patterns is a bit easier to see. If there's something that keeps popping up, trust and believe that it's significant for you in some way. Being open-minded and curious about that, and you'll see patterns that are trying to tell you something. Number 4 is accept that mistakes will be made. Your life isn't a test of perfection. It's an exercise in meaning and truth. I've never met a single person who didn't make mistakes. It's all part of the growth process. So take it easy on yourself. Fix what can be fixed and forget the rest. Keep moving. Number 5 is follow your heart. Phil had a really hard time in the beginning. Maybe the only joy he had in the day in those early days came from his piano lessons. So even in the darkest days, there's something that lights up your heart. So let it do that. Your heart will help guide you out of the darkness if you cultivate a relationship with it. So many of us shut it down because the heart not only loves, it hurts. And we don't want that hurt, but it's a package deal. If you want the joy, you have to have the sadness too. So opt for the sadness. You can handle it. And life's not particularly meaningful without both. 6 is to step into your power. When I look back at all the past lives I endured where I felt isolated and alone, it was totally because I assumed no power. Life was hard in all of them. But I could have opened up, connected with someone, or done something. I felt helpless because I didn't know my own power. And some of those lifetimes, that was a social conditioning. But I didn't have to play by those rules, and neither do you. We're all free to choose our thoughts. We're only slaves in our minds if we permit ourselves to be. Number 7, finally, influence what is within your power and let go of the rest. We all have limits. I can't grow 6 inches. I can't throw a pigskin a quarter mile. I can't do a lot of things, but there are many things I can do. If I focus on those, I can feel like I did my part. I was true to myself and I lived up to my values. And that's all any of us can do. There are times in society where real hardship happens. War happens. Natural disasters happen. We don't have the ability to stop that. But if we survive, we can work on beginning again. And what's more wonderful than a day after a storm? It's amazing how fresh and clean the air feels. Live for that. The foundation of human culture is stories. You're never alone if you can recall one story. Every story, from Hansel and Gretel to Groundhog Day to your own past life stories, are rich with metaphors that you can use to go from disenchanted to enchanted. If you open your heart and mind, you can always find a seed that you can sprout into something wonderful if tended. On that note, I'd love to hear about what you saw in the movie Groundhog Day. What did I miss? Let me know in the comments. Or if you've had a past life regression, I'd love to hear about that too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do that so you won't miss our next episode. Next week, Tigria Gardenia is going to be here to expand your mind about the plant world. We had a really captivating chat, and I want you to catch that. So see you next week. Ciao.
Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Spotify so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, why not show your love with a review? Thanks. See you next week.